Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Mohammad Sohail Khan. In this session, I will be talking about designing OD interventions. So just have a quick overview regarding how organization development is being defined. So OD is defined as an effort which is planned, which is organization wide, which should be managed from the top, and it should increase organizational effectiveness and health through planned interventions in the organization's process using behavioral science knowledge. So OD is typically an effort that should be planned. So if there is some unplanned activity, it won't come under the category of OD. So OD effort is always a planned effort. Secondly, it would be organization-wide. Organization-wide means like it will somehow encompass the whole organization. Then it should be managed from the top. So for example, in any OD intervention, we need a top level support. Also, one of the way or one of the intention of an OD intervention is to increase organizational effectiveness and health through the planned interventions. So somehow OD is based on some interventions in the organization process. So let's think about like what kind of planned interventions this would be. But however, I think so it would be best that if we have a clear idea about what is an intervention. So interventions are basically defined as a set of sequenced activities. Again, sequenced activities that would be planned in nature. So a set of sequenced activities and planned actions or events intended to help organization to increase its effectiveness. So for example, from the word intervention, we can somehow have some kind of understanding that it will intervene in some sort of organizational activities. So once an intervention has been taken place, so it means that we intervene the status quo of organization. So what is the status quo of organization? So it means that however the organization was running in the past, the interventions basically intervene in that status quo and try to change those events, those tasks, those procedure in terms of having some positive effects on organization effectiveness. So intervention is a series and planned actions to increase organizational effectiveness. However, if one thinks that that intervention is all about increasing the organizational effectiveness, then how an intervention can increase organizational effectiveness? So that would be the first question. So interventions needs to be in a way that it basically results in a positive manner in organizational either profit or either organizational capability. It should have some positive effect on organization in some way. So now let us discuss something about the characteristics of effective intervention. So what are the typical characteristics of interventions or effective intervention? So first of all, one question that one can ask is that, is the intervention relevant to the needs of the organization? So this is really important question in terms of understanding the intervention as its whole, and also this information is really important in terms of understanding organizational literature per se. So interventions should be relevant to the need of the organization. So what does this relevant means? Relevant means that it should be based on some kind of valid information. it should give free and informed choices to the organizational members, and it should somehow increase the internal commitment of employees towards that change. Again, what does that mean? So valid information means that it should reflect what organization members was thinking that the problem was there in the first place. So for example, if organizational member was thinking that there is a problem in the production line of, say for example in a manufacturing firm, then that specific intervention should address that production limitation. So it should based on some kind of valid information so that employees of that organization perceive and feel that they are basically addressing the primary concern of that primary concern of that organization. Again, those interventions should be free and informed choice. So for example, it will give an opportunity to employees to engage in that kind of a change. So for example, if somehow employees needs to be in a process of making decision about that change. Making decision about that change means that they should know that why the change is important, why we should change, and what is the importance of that change. So if they are somehow involved in that decision making power, it will help them in understanding the nature of that intervention as well. And also an important part is that they may choose even not to participate in that change initiative. Third, organization members should accept the ownership of that change. So that intervention should create some kind of internal commitment into the employees of an organization so that they accept the ownership of that change. Again, the intervention should be based on causal knowledge of intended outcomes. So what is the causal knowledge? So causal knowledge means that those outcomes will actually produce results. So that intervention should be that much informed that it will actually producing those kinds of outcomes that that organization is basically looking for. So the outcomes that will result after those or as a result of those intervention should actually produce the intended result. So for that you need a lot of data, and those data points or those data elements should based on some kind of causal knowledge. Causal knowledge means that those outcomes basically really produce some kind of results, positive results for that organization. Third, does it transfer competence to manage the change to organization members? Again, I think so this is the theme that is kind of repeating in organizational development literature. Whether that intervention creates some kind of competence in organizational members, because once organization members have that kind of capabilities that they can manage the change, it will automatically embed into the culture of the organization. However, if somehow organization members do not have that kind of competence, then that change won't go into the organizational culture or won't go deeper into the organizational culture. It will just stay on the surface. So what does this means to go the change into the organizational culture? So it means that it should embed into the values, attitudes of the organizational members so that they know or they should have the knowledge to manage the change, because organizations cannot survive the change unless and until their members have not the ability to absorb that change, adopt that change, and manage that change as well. So let's see that what kind of intervention that one should design, or what is the design of effective intervention. So effective intervention should have the capability in terms of producing some kind of readiness to change, or it should enhance the capability of the organizational members so that they can change. It should embed into the culture of the organization, and it should be designed by some kind of by some kind of change agent who has the necessary capability in terms of designing those interventions. However, the organizational literature says that these four are somehow the contingencies in the change process. So what does this mean? Just think of this as that why the change efforts fail. Just think in a way, which we are just thinking from a different perspective. So most of the organizational change fails because the organization is not ready for that change. So what does this mean that organization is not ready for the change? It means that organizational members are not ready for the change. They do not have the available resources. They do not have the commitment to change. They do not know that what kind of change efforts we need that will change the ultimate shape of that organization. They do not know that what kind of diagnosis that we need, what is basically the problem in that organization, that and why basically change is being imposed on them. So that basically covers the readiness for change. Secondly, capability to change. So most of the organizational change efforts fail because employees do not have the capability to change, or organization somehow do not have the capability to change. So what kind of capabilities do we need in terms of change? So for example, first of all, it needs necessary skills and knowledge to at least create the change and then adopt the change as well. Secondly, they need some kind of motivational elements for their employees so that it will help the employees into that change scenario. Secondly, the change effort should have a political support. And when I'm talking about the political support, I mean that support from the top. Support from the top means that the top hierarchy of your organization or of any organization should be really committed in terms of bringing that change into their organization. Number 3, most of the organizational change fails because of the cultural context as well. So what is the cultural context? So once that word culture came into the scenario of in organization, it means organizational culture, it means organizational climate, and it also means the culture in which that organization exists. So for example, organizational culture can also be impacted by a national culture. So for example, there's a lots of literature that is available that says that somehow national culture is also embedded in the organizational culture. So for example, if the interventions are like that is either really opposed to the cultural context or really opposed in terms of national cultural context, then most of those changes face opposition. So one of the reasons for the failure of organizational change would be the changes or the interventions that are suggested won't be able to embed into the current culture of that organization. And number 4, most of the organizational change efforts fail because the change agent or the organizational development consultant do not have the required capability to create that change, to initiate that change, to manage that change. And when I'm talking about organizational development or the change agent, so it can be anyone. It can be from the internal source. So for example, it can be someone that is coming from the organization itself, or it can be someone that is basically hired by the organization. So it can be an outside consultant as well. And again, there's a whole debate that whether OD consultant is really a change agent or not, or change agent does really mean or OD consultant. So the change agent here means that the person or the initiator of that change. So if that person, that initiator of that change do not have the necessary capabilities, they cannot derive the change. So now we are talking about the change, but we do not know that what to change. So for example, OD is a planned effort to create an improvement in the effectiveness of an organization. But what are those targets that organizational development needs to concentrate? So here in this particular slide, we have kind of 4 targets of the change. So for example, maybe the change is needed into the system of the organization, or into the people of the organization, or the process or the technology. So what does this mean? So if you just clearly look at those 4 pillars or 4 target of change, basically these are the things, or these are the elements that are basically, you can find all those elements in each and every organization. So for example, organization is a set of systems, organization is a set of processes, people or employees works in that organization, and somehow organization is supported by some kind of technology. And again, technology doesn't mean just the IT. Technology means the work design in itself as well, that how the work is being designed in that organization. So main targets or main change targets will be either the system of the organization, like the structural system, or the network of system, or the processes, the task, the activities, how those tasks and activities are being performed in an organization. Maybe that needs, maybe there's a need to change those processes. Maybe there's a need to change the system or the hierarchical structures or the structure of that organization. Maybe we need a change into the thinking of the people in terms of changing the mentality of the people, behavior, attitudes of those people. Or somehow maybe we just need to change the whole work design. We need to change the whole work design, and where that technology elements came in. So again, what kind of contingencies are there for the target of change? So for example, again, looking at that from the different perspective, that what kind of issues happens in terms of once we touch the target of change, what are the contingency elements? So maybe the contingency element would be the strategic issues of the change. So for example, the strategy of the organization needs to be changed. Maybe the technological and structural issues needs to be changed. Maybe there is some issues regarding the human resources, the people, the people of those organization needs to be changed in some way. And when I talk about the people, it means that their behaviors, their attitudes, their way of doing work. Or maybe there's a issue in the human process. And what I mean by human process means that how organization is basically functioning in terms of their teams and in their units, and how for example, how the groups interact with each other. Either there's a difference in terms of understanding of the organizational strategy. For example, maybe marketing is has some kind of different elements in terms of thinking about the strategy. Maybe human resource think that what we are doing is basically aligned with the organizational strategy. However, for the organization to gain an impactful profit, we need all those elements in some kind of alignment. So we have to look at the human process of those organizational issues as well. So what does this mean? It means that there are four types of interventions. So one of the interventions basically talks about or geared towards changing the process, the human process of the organizational member. Then there is an intervention that is basically designed in terms of technostructural, that basically impacts the structural and the technological side of the organization. So for example, we are talking about the work design, we are talking about the hierarchical structures of the organization, we are talking about the whether that organization is basically working as a functional hierarchy or the divisional hierarchy, or what kind of work design do we have in that organization. So we are talking about these kinds of interventions. Or maybe there's some kind of human resource management issues that is basically happening at that time, and the organization is basically impacted because of that human resources issue. So maybe there is an issue regarding the motivation of the employees, regarding the leadership structures of the employees, regarding the relationship between the leaders and relationship between the employees per se. So in those types of interventions, we'll talking about human resource or human aspects of interventions. Or maybe there is a strategical interventions that may be needed for that organization. And for the strategical interventions, I mean that maybe there's a need to change the strategy of that organization. So maybe the organizations needs to think about the strategical initiatives, that if they will take those strategical initiatives, then their organization can flourish. So I hope that this session gave you some kind of understanding in terms of that what is OD, organizational development interventions, how one can design effective interventions, what are some of the ways or the reasons that organizational change efforts fails, what are basically the targets of that organizational change, and what are the typical interventions that organizational literature really talks about. Thank you very much.